Welcome to the Shudder. I've had several requests for some Michigan DOGMAN encounters, but I couldn't find any that were anything more than roadside sightings or a glimpse of a possible creature. Not that I don't think those are worthy of telling, just not much of a story to them, really. I did find some DOGMAN accounts from Minnesota and Wisconsin that I think might make you shudder a bit. So, get ready, find that lazy boy, and settle in. I live in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, which is about an hour drive from Fargo, North Dakota. My mother-in-law lives out in the country, about 3/4 of a mile out of Fergus Falls, and I was staying there one evening while my wife and her mother went shopping in town. They called me and asked if I wanted to go to a 7 p.m. movie, so I left the house at about 6:30 to meet them at the theater. About 2 miles from her house, on a country road known as Wendell Road, I saw 3 white-tailed deer. 2 of the deer were rather small, probably just yearlings, and a larger doe, who I assumed was their mother. Me, being an avid hunter, and I enjoy seeing wildlife, I stopped to look at the deer. I should have also mentioned that I hunt in and have spent my whole life in the Fergus Falls area. The deer were following a small creek bed, which is in fact the Mistinka River, so there was hardly any trees except for one. Maybe because I didn't see it there because of the tree, but I just noticed something crouching behind the tree on the side of the road, looking at the deer. I believe it was hunting them. It just sat there, looking at the deer, not taking any notice of me, even though I was in my truck no more than 40 yards away. It had one hand on the tree that it was bracing itself with. What struck me as most shocking was the fact that it seemed to be on 2 legs, and not 4. Its hands appeared to have opposable thumbs, and were rather slender and long, very unlike a wolf. The creature looked as though if it stood upright, it would be over 8 feet tall, with a protruding muzzle, broad shoulders, a slender waist, and thick, muscular thighs. Being as there was snow on the ground, I couldn't see the feet. It was dark brown in color throughout the body. After several seconds of looking at the creature in shock, the deer ran off. Then, something amazing happened. It looked right at me, as though blaming me for losing its meal. It just sat there, looking at me and blinking, but not moving. This scared the crap out of me, so I hit the gas pedal and drove off. It was very dark after the movie, so I didn't much feel like trudging through 3.5 feet of snow with the possibility of a monster out there who was currently looking for a meal that I scared off. So I continued on home and came back the next day to look for tracks or sign, but couldn't find anything. I hadn't told anyone about what I saw that night until writing this, and only because of the others who have come forward with their experiences. I believe I've seen a DOGMAN, just like many others have seen. It was the summer of '97, and I was 13 years old. I was rollerblading from a part of town called Old Cottage Grove, a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota. It was around 9:30 p.m., and I was rollerblading back home from a girlfriend's house with a friend. We were just coming around a bend in the road that went past the farm I believe at the time was called Green Acres Farm. There were cattle there in the field, which brings me to the conclusion that maybe I was just at the right place at the wrong time. As I was rounding the bend in the road to start coming up the hill, I felt a very strong sense of fear. It was like my body was telling me to get the heck out of there, yet I couldn't figure out why. I can tell you this much. For the first and only time in my life, I felt like I was no longer at the top of the food chain. Right when I started to pick up the pace to get out of there is when I heard the sound that came from the fenced-in cattle area to my left. It sounded like nails grabbing a pole or fence, and then what sounded like a dog's claws when walking or running on a tile floor, except this just sounded like a quick leap to the street pavement. As I turned around to look, there stood what looked to be a wiry, gray-haired werewolf. It was like time had stopped. There was a street light close to the woods, maybe 15 feet behind it, so all I could make out was a silhouette and the color of this monster. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, with the head of what looked like a German shepherd, with long ears and muzzle. I could see the thing was built like a bodybuilder. It stood like a man, not like what some folks say with these things having dog-like limbs. It had long, slim hands with long nails on its fingertips. It had a slim waist, but its upper body was muscular beyond belief. The thing that always stuck with me, besides the point of seeing the thing in the first place, was that its head was turned to the side and its snout was up in the air. The one thing that really stuck out and was out of place to me was that I could see the thing's breath as though it was winter, but mind you, it was the end of June. It looked as though it was smelling my scent, but that's just what it looked like. Before I knew it, I was yelling to my friend to get the heck out of there and not to look back, but it's almost as though he was in another world because he didn't seem to feel, let alone see, what I had just experienced. Fast forward 21 years, and I still hadn't told anyone about this encounter. That is, until my oldest brother and I were trading stories one summer evening, and it just sort of came up as we were talking about Bigfoot. Mind you, my brother is a firm believer in this animal, so I said the heck with it and started telling him about what happened to me, going to the point of pulling out the original drawings I drew of it. To my surprise, he didn't look at me or laugh at me like I was positive he would. Instead, he started asking me if I had ever heard of the Michigan DOGMAN or seen anything on it, which I replied no. He then pulled up an image on the internet of a sketch that an eyewitness had drawn, and it sent shivers down my spine. It not only looked like my drawing, it looked exactly like the thing I saw that night in the summer of 1997 in Old Cottage Grove, Minnesota. To this day, I find myself trying to wrap my head around what I saw. It feels good to get this out there and somewhat off my chest. I hope someone finds something helpful in this experience, and I hope this sort of thing never happens again. My wife and I were driving back to our cabin we have in the North Woods after visiting friends in town. It was a hot, muggy summer night, but it was cooling down fast, which made it start to get foggy. The road went about half a mile through a spruce bog, then up a hill to where a farm field was on the right. Hardwoods were on the left. I was in my mid-50s at the time and did not believe in things like what we were about to see. Out of the fog, from the farm field, going from right to left, came a creature. It was about 8 to 10 feet tall. The best way to describe what we saw would be to say it looked like a person who had jumped off a trampoline and took off with their arms stretched out in front of them, with their legs bent. It was upright and covered with fur. It was not a coyote or a wolf, but looked like a cross between a man and some kind of canine. It had pointy ears and a long snout. My wife later said the head reminded her of the Egyptian gods, but furry. It landed flat on its feet directly in front of my wife's van, no more than 20 feet away. The craziest thing is, it landed and jumped like a kangaroo, flying back off into the fog. Its arms were sticking straight out in front of it. It did not act or look like any canine we knew of. We had been going slow because of the fog, and as soon as she saw the thing, she stopped the van. We just looked at each other like, did we really just see that? However, we did see it, and it still freaks us out to this day. Another weird thing is, we both felt that it was not of this world. It did not move naturally, and that was just a feeling that we got. We don't tell many people about what we saw, because the people we have told don't believe or don't want to believe we saw what we did. I did tell a good friend of mine who said when he was a kid, his father, who was a logger, used to tell him about loggers in the woods seeing DOGMAN. I see that other rational people have seen similar creatures. Like some others, I was with someone who witnessed it too. It must really be difficult for someone who sees one of these things by themselves to try and explain to others what they saw. This happened to me when I was 10 or 11 years old, and I'll never forget what happened that day. I was at my grandparents' house, who were watching me for the day. They lived out in a mixture of farmland and woods in rural Wisconsin. Their yard is mostly surrounded by farmland, but to the right side of the yard is a couple of acres of woods and swamp. It was a really hot, muggy morning in July. I was standing out on the deck shooting at some cans with my BB gun. Suddenly, I got the sense something was wrong. I felt like I was being watched. I started scanning the tree line, and down at the edge of the trees, standing about 60 yards away by the swamp, was this thing that I can only describe as a dogman. It was about 8 feet tall, covered with shaggy gray hair. It had the classic dogman face, long snout with pointed ears on top of its head, and it was very muscular. It was standing on 2 legs, but it appeared to be leaning against a tree. We locked eyes, and while it was probably only 10 seconds, it felt like much longer. It sounds silly, but I felt the thing had a sinister grin on its face. It was extremely intimidating. I know that had that thing wanted to kill me, it easily could have. I could relive this encounter now with a shotgun instead of a BB gun, and I'd still be just as terrified as I was then. It definitely had a very negative and sinister vibe to it. After locking eyes with this thing, it just bolted off on 2 legs through the swamp and emerged farther down the tree line and then ran off into the forest. At first, I thought it might have been one of my older cousins who lived nearby playing a joke on me, but then I realized there was no way they could be wearing a suit, be that tall, and clear the swamp as fast as that thing did. I wasn't going to tell my grandparents I saw a werewolf down by the swamp. They'd never believe me. So I just kept my mouth shut and tried to carry on with my day. Later that afternoon, I was talking to my aunt, and she brought up the fact that she had heard strange noises the night before. When I asked what they sounded like, she said it was a lot of snarling and growling, and it kind of sounded like an animal being attacked. I don't know if it was connected to the creature that I saw, but in my mind, it confirmed what I saw was real. There you go. 4 dogman encounters, and I will try to find some Michigan dogman encounters and get them recorded for you. I'll be working on some viewer submissions of strange happenings next, and I'll get those recorded and out as soon as I can. Once again, thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up and a share, and if you subscribe, make sure you hit that notification bell so you can join me here next time for the Shudder.